Hey, LA Progressive friends and family. This is Dick Price and Sharon Kyle coming to you from the LA Progressive. This is our office. And we kind of run on a real short budget, so a small budget. So we're asking you to, if you can't contribute, to at least share, to join, to subscribe, and to give us a thumbs up. Thanks so much. Progressive friends and family. This is Dick and Sharon joining you again from the LA Progressive, and we're delighted once again to have Bill Blum join us for another enriching conversation about a piece that he wrote for the LA Progressive. Bill Blum is a former judge and death penalty defense attorney. He's the author of 3 legal thrillers published by Penguin Putnam: Prejudicial Error, The Last Appeal, and The Face of Justice. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks. Always great to be with you.
So as we crawl into Trump's second term, you broached the topic of Trump's third term, which he mentioned as a joke, it seems, several times over the years, going way back. But you say maybe we should pay attention to what he's saying. How so?
Well, if we were correct during the campaign that once reelected, Trump's not going to leave if he can possibly stay, I think we should take our own admonition seriously. And so I started to think, well, how will he justify that, assuming that he's physically and mentally capable of continuing? That's a big caveat. We won't know that for another 4 years, but assuming that he is, how will he justify another term, especially in view of the 22nd Amendment adopted in 1951, which says that no one can be elected president more than twice. So I got into the issue, researched the history of presidential terms, researched the history of the 22nd Amendment, and I came to the conclusion that the amendment, by its wording, prohibits the election of someone to be president more than twice, but it doesn't limit the number of terms a president can serve, and it wouldn't prohibit a third term if a president ascended to a third term by means other than being elected. And it doesn't take a lot of thought to understand that there are a few paths to that kind of result. One would be if Trump were to run in 2028 as vice president, and then whoever is the stand-in as president at that time, if they win, simply resigns and Trump succeeds under the Constitution. Another way for him to do that is to become Speaker of the House, and then both cardboard cutout Republicans resign and he succeeds that way. Now, we know that people can serve more than 2 terms if, as the 22nd Amendment says, the third term is less than 2 years. So you think of someone like LBJ, who became president after the Kennedy assassination, and he was going to run again in 1968, and he probably would have won. So had he run and been successful, he would have been in office nearly 10 years. And there's been a lot of discussion over the decades, over the centuries, about the length of presidential terms. It was an issue at the Constitutional Convention. There were many delegates who wanted to limit the number of terms, limit the number of years a president could serve. But eventually they left that issue unresolved.
So if I might interject a little bit here, Bill, because you touched on LBJ, and immediately I started to try to remember. So it was November 1963, correct? That President Kennedy was assassinated, and LBJ immediately went from being the vice president to serving as the president for the remainder of the term that President Kennedy would have served had he not been assassinated. So LBJ had that remainder. Then LBJ was elected rightfully in his own right in 1964. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay,
That's right.
So then he had the remainder of the Kennedy presidency. He was elected in 64. He served those 4 years. And then in 1968, he ran again, but he pulled out of the race. But he was running again, and that would not have been a violation of the 22nd Amendment, because the 22nd Amendment allows for a person to run for president twice.
That's right.
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to repeat that for our people who are trying to follow this.
So one of the reasons I wrote the article and got into the subject is that people assume that you can't serve more than 2 terms as president, more than 2 full terms as president. And that's not what the 22nd Amendment says. And this has been, as I wrote, the subject of debate academically and politically over the years. And it's interesting that the party in power with a strong president has often been the party that argues that the 22nd Amendment is inherently undemocratic and that the people should be able to elect their leader as they wish. This happened when Eisenhower was president around 1960, and there was talk about drafting him for a 3rd term. And there was also a lot of chatter around Reagan. Both Eisenhower and Reagan at various times stated that they thought the 22nd Amendment was undemocratic. There was some joking around the end of Obama's 2nd term that he could have been nominated a 3rd time, but he disavowed any interest in it. On the other side of the ledger, there have been efforts to clarify the 22nd Amendment. Most recently, Dan Goldman, congressman from New York, has introduced a resolution in the House, which is going nowhere, which would clarify that the 22nd Amendment prohibits 2 terms of service. Now, the legal argument there is a little more convoluted than the one that I offered in the article. I offered a very straightforward textualist argument. The amendment says nothing about serving 2 terms. It says that you can't be elected more than twice. But the people who say that it means more than that go back to the 12th Amendment, which says in one section that in order to be vice president, you must meet the qualifications of president. And they say, well, the president can't run more than twice because we know that with the 22nd Amendment, so therefore the vice president can't either. Now, I don't think that's a good argument because the drafters of the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in, I believe, 1804, didn't have the 22nd Amendment in mind. So I don't think that's really a good argument. Then there's this big compilation of constitutional law called the U.S. Constitution Annotated, which the Congressional Research Service maintains. And that's consistent legally with the argument that the 22nd Amendment would not prohibit a former 2-term president from succeeding to a 3rd term through lawful but non-electoral means. Now think of another way that it could happen. Let's say that there's what we call a contingent election. Nobody's elected president because there's a tie in the Electoral College. You could conceivably have the House determine who's the president. That wouldn't be elected twice, more than twice. So I'm trying to figure out a way legally that someone like Trump, who has dictatorial aspirations, could come out and justify a 3rd term legally. Of course, the other way to do it is to push for a constitutional amendment. It's very difficult to do, but perhaps possible. That would allow him to run a 3rd time. All of this is speculative, constitutional law analysis. I thought it would be very interesting for readers. And of course, none of it may come to pass, in part because Trump simply may be too old. He seems to be slipping, but he still has a lot of energy, and he is not a policymaker anyway. So the people who are making policy behind him seems like Elon Musk. They want to make America more like an IT Silicon Valley shop. To heck with the working class, to heck with the ordinary people. We're just going to end regulation and promote innovation and have low taxes. These guys are the policymakers. Vance to a certain extent, not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a figurehead, but he's a necessary figurehead. So as I see it, if he's 82 years old and running in 2028, and he's, say, in better physical condition than Biden is now, why wouldn't they try to run him again?
Yeah, and you also say, I mean, he has no real regard for the Constitution and the law. He could just decide to, declare himself
That's
for
the other
another
thing.
term, because as long as he controls all aspects of the government as he does currently, the government, who would stand in his way? Certainly not this Supreme Court.
That's the other thing. We had that case, the Anderson case last term in the Supreme Court, where Colorado said you're not going to be on our ballot because you're an insurrectionist, and the 14th Amendment says insurrectionists can't hold office. Straightforward. The Supreme Court said, well, it's not self-executing. Is the 22nd Amendment self-executing? What if the Supreme Court says, yes, it's self-executing, you can't run a third time, and Trump says, so what? I have a majority of states, which would give me the Electoral College saying they're going to put me on the ballot. What are you going to do about it?
Right. The other thing too, if when he said this over the years, well, that's Trump being nasty funny, the way he likes to be. But there's a genius to his approach. I mean, he throws a lot of things up against the wall. And if they don't stick, he just moves on. But if they do stick, then he generates interest. I think his whole thing about anti-immigrants, I mean, he came down the golden staircase and he made all those ugly remarks about rapists and murderers coming over from Mexico. And if it hadn't caught fire, he would have dropped it. But it gained a foothold in society, and now a great number of people are deeply in distress about immigrants that don't affect them at all. And if we kick them all out, then the price of avocados, well, I think they'll be up there with diamonds.
I think that's absolutely right. We have to take Trump seriously, even when he sounds funny, because there's usually more than a grain of salt of truth behind this. And ask yourself, do you think that Trump, if he's healthy enough, would want to leave office in 2028?
No, I think his thought is he'll move some family member in right behind him if he can manage it.
Right. So I want to get into the statement that you made about Trump just simply disregarding if he wants to do something unconstitutional, regardless of the fact that he has planted his own Supreme Court justices that will rule in ways that he would prefer. But irrespective of that, would Trump just do something unconstitutional, as his behavior suggested that? And there's one thing about his behavior, I would say yes, given what we've already seen over the past 8 years, but also his favorite president is Andrew Jackson. He makes that so clear. I mean, he had this big portrait of Andrew Jackson in the Oval Office. And you close your piece talking about how both Andrew Jackson and President Abraham Lincoln defied the Supreme Court, and you asked Trump would no doubt love to outdo them. And I wanted to talk about Andrew Jackson's defiance of the Supreme Court. And if I may, because I mean, that's the thing that gives me the chills. So Andrew Jackson, he's famous for the quote, John Marshall has made his decision, John Marshall being the Supreme Court justice at the time when Andrew Jackson was president. He says, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. And what Andrew Jackson was talking about was an 1832, and I brought this, I'm reading this, an 1832 Supreme Court case Worcester versus Georgia, in which the court ruled in favor of the Cherokee Indians against Georgia's attempt to seize their land. Andrew Jackson, ignored the court's decision and sent troops to evict the Cherokees, forcing them to migrate west on the Trail of Tears. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
And whose portrait was hanging in the Oval when Trump was president? Prominently. Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, Andrew Jackson. And he said more than once, that's his favorite president. I don't know. It's just chilling to me, who he feels admiration for. And he never really says why he admires Andrew Jackson. But as a person of color, Andrew Jackson should be the last person that a contemporary president would admire.
Absolutely correct. So someone or many people who are smarter than Trump are feeding him various ideas, which he distills into very simple formulations. And that's the way this generally works. But this talk of a third term or more has its roots in a certain corner of the legal academy. And they are the people who analyze things according to originalism, according to textualism, that is the idea that we're going to read the Constitution simply like a statute, and we don't care about the practical consequences. And then Trump comes along and he understands those ideas in a very superficial way, but in a way which is easily digested by his base. And so my thought is that all of this depends upon how successful Trump is in the coming 4 years. If the people he puts on the cabinet are as bad as they seem, then they're going to mismanage the economy pretty badly. And Trump rapidly is going to lose his popularity. And then all of these plans for staying on, I think, are going to go down in flames. So there's going to be some strife and struggle about them. But assuming that the economy hums along and Trump remains popular, I don't see why he's going to leave. And yes, he loves Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson has this quote, this may or may not be apocryphal, but it summarizes his attitude towards John Marshall, which Trump could easily adopt with regard to this Supreme Court, which, although very compliant with him, could conceivably rule against him. I think that it's important, again, to get ahead of events, to anticipate where things are going. And that's another reason why I wrote this column. I want people to understand that when Trump says, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, and when pundits on the left and the center say there's no way he's going to leave voluntarily the next time, he tried to stay the last time, that he's going to try to do it in a way that either is consistent with the Constitution or which he challenges the Constitution. And he says, I'm the president. I can do what I want. I don't have to be bound by a decision handed down by 9 unelected elite attorneys who comprise the Supreme Court. We've got to be prepared for this. And then the question is, how do you get prepared? America needs an opposition movement, whether it's the Democratic Party or some combination of the Democratic Party infused by other groups. It needs to have an opposition, not a resistance so much anymore, but a full-fledged opposition like you have in Europe. There has to be an organized opposition. Right now, there isn't much of one.
Right.
In order to get there, we got to appreciate the stakes.
So, I'm with you. I think as he brings this clown car onto the cabinet of people who are unprepared, inappropriate, and purposely provocative, it's going to blow up in Trump's face, but in America's face. So in a way, I'm rooting for bad things for America, except Trump has proved us wrong time after time. He's beat our judicial system. I mean, he beat it. He's beat our media. He's beat our electoral system. He's riding high now. Polls say most people approve his transition approach. I agree. I think somehow Democrats or left-leaning people or sane people need to figure out how to come together and develop an effective opposition, which in Europe they oftentimes have, and we tend not to have so much.
That's right, we do. And there's no time to waste in doing this. I do think that Trump is going to face many challenges like every president does. He probably will not be up to meeting those challenges. And I think that approval rating, which he has so far, is going to plummet pretty easily and quickly. And as far as, the threats that he has to go after his political opponents through Kash Patel, if they bring either a big-time civil case or a criminal prosecution against some of his opponents, I think that he will lose and lose big time, and that will be telling. So it's almost as though there's a dare going on. Let's say he prosecutes someone like Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney will raise all the money in the world to get the best lawyers, and she will call as witnesses all these people who are Trumpers, including the president, who's the primary accuser. Does he really want to be dragged down into a court battle? I don't think so. So there are reasons, small reasons to be optimistic. But the larger picture is we need to get ready because America seems like it is rapidly becoming an autocracy. And we need to be prepared.
So I'd like to inject a term that I recently learned. It's called prefigurative politics. And it sounds like what we need is prefigurative politics. I'm encouraging people who are listening to this to Google it. But it is a politics that aims to build the new within the old. The term is often used to describe the building and sustaining of a solidarity economy that will ultimately replace our existing economy. But it is done internally. So you talked about not really having a revolution, so to speak, but infusing the Democratic Party or some other pre-existing party with the means to be prepared for what we're about to face with Trump. So I encourage people to look up prefigurative politics. And I also want to tell everyone, please subscribe to this. Part of the problem that we are having with this administration is that there's been this slow deterioration of the democratic processes all the processes that support democracy, and one of them being the media. So independent media is essential if we want to reinvigorate our democracy. I think our democracy actually never really existed the way that we're taught that it existed, but we had a chance and we still have a chance, but we've got to share this content and build up all of the systems that support democracy. So thank you, Bill.
Absolutely. Always great to talk with you.
Yeah, good luck with your moving, Bill. Talk to you next time.
Okay.
Okay.
So long.
Bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.